Well, for coherence, I did fall back on the electromagnetic fields that are set up. Uh, I had to make if you're going to talk about the electromagnetic fields, those that are available to our electromagnetic devices, our X-rays and all that kind of stuff, we have to remember that the they're the messenger, but not the message. The electromagnetic fields which the heart kicks up, and they're very real. You know that little Institute of Heart Math? Wonderful bunch. They're the first ones that began to take these electromagnetic pictures of the heart and find that under certain circumstances, the electromagnetic fields of the heart and the brain go into perfect coherence. Their waveforms cohere, or otherwise we have incoherence, and the waveforms cancel each other out, and you get the usual incoherent thought, action, behaviors, and so forth that makes up. So when we have, I can't think of a quick analogy, but of such things as our political economic system, where you have all these bitter struggles for supremacy, which are, of course, setting up just incoherent field after another. And not only does the public really feel that, we all feel the tremendous tension in us of hearing what the other side is going to do if they get in charge and put us in, etc. All that sets up this tremendously incoherent field of action in which we're all caught. And so when I get to thinking of what would ever bring it back into coherence or balance, I must say I'm a serious pessimist along that line.
Well, imagine it was possible. Imagine it was possible, please, and then tell me what it would look like.
Robert Wolfe, with two F's on the end, wrote a little book called Original Wisdom. My friend Tom Hartman found Robert Wolfe's little diary or something, and found that Robert Wolfe was still alive in his 90s, living in retirement over in Hawaii. He flew over to Hawaii to get hold of Robert Wolfe's and get him to agree to let his diary be published. But Robert Wolfe had, in the course of a long life among the Malaysian people, had in following his study of the Malaysians in the jungles, the real original Malaysians, he finally discovered the Signoi people. They were only a myth, but Robert Wolfe had discovered the Signoi because of his own, I would say, purity of heart. He had those people of Malaysia so terribly much. As a trained European medical man, trained in Holland, but born in Malaysia, and with a deep love of the Malaysian people, went back to get his education, and then took over a government job of trying to deal with the forest people, to retrain them so they would work in our rubber plantations after we chopped down all their trees. That's what he was hired to do. Of course, and he immediately realized the tragedy and really the horror of what they were going to do. And he ended up discovering the Signoi and living with them. And he turned out this book, Original Wisdom. That's what it was called in his old age. And it's one of the most important works I think it's ever been written. it simply verifies something I've known. And it sounds like self-aggrandizement as I say I've always known, but I've known it from the time I was little, that there is this incredible loving kindness called the living earth, and that we can be absolutely in accord with it. That is, what is totally coherent with it, and no intercoherence. And one of the first decisions I had ever made, and it was in my teens, is that what we call science, I ran across a marvelous little comment about the utter fallacy of believing that everything arises from these little tiny balls that are floating around and foolishness. But my big contention for a long time, and it's not popular in this day and time, is that science and the scientific view of everything is the greatest destructive enemy our species has ever had. And the fact that we have made a religion of science, science says, and that religion has a very bad God who is just tearing the heck out of us. We've lost our spiritual foundings. We've lost our spiritual grounding. And I'm not talking about religion. When I wrote a little book just 2 or 3 years ago called The Death of Religion and the Rebirth of Spirit. Boy, religion has been anything but spiritual. It's been the death of spirit. But as we begin to rediscover the spirit, one of the things that I discovered, I called it unconflicted behavior. If you give up all fear, I mean radical throwing of all self-defense or all self-protection, throw it to the winds. A radical risk of self, and something can happen that can't happen any other way. I put this, I know, in one of my books at least. Some of the utterly bizarre things which I got to doing when I found that if I just threw myself away, I had nothing to protect, all these things could happen. And then when you get to talking with people about it, they tend to kind of avoid you after that because they figure you have slipped a cog in there somewhere. I will say in all the non-ordinary phenomena which I had from late teens on, I always had an audience, not that I expected one or looked for one, they just happened to be there. And the discovery that fear is the only enemy we have. And I have felt that the medical profession feeds on this fear, feeds on it. All this constant fear. But there is such a thing as total, radical acceptance of your death without any holds barred whatsoever. At which point, I'm not saying it disappears, but everything changes. I don't think anything is the same after getting rid of your personal fear. None of the stuff that you find going on out there really ever touches you. And somehow or other, everything works out all right. I know when World War II came along and we all had to do our part. And I really felt each time, these hunches, what's the move to make, and I would make the move. And I ended up of all things, and people say, how could you do this if you're really a spiritual individual? I'm not talking about spiritual as eliminating anything. It simply opens you up. But it was back in that war that I discovered if you just let go and allow things to happen, they'll be the right thing to happen. As human beings have literally infinite potential, but we're blocked by an infinite self-imposed limitation. The only limitations we really ever have are self-imposed. And I've known that a long, long time. And I've had it. I've found that by throwing yourself away, which means a radical risk of oneself, all sorts of things can open up. And I've often wondered, how is it that we could start and help our people, our species, our families, and so on, out of these self-imposed limitations, and what can then happen? I mean, and even like coming here, I picked this little place just to get as far away from everything as I possibly could. I had my wife and daughter with me at the time. And people would always say, what are you going to do? How will you make a living? And I thought, I've never made a living. Life does the living. And that sounds, again, it's like ego aggrandizement, but it isn't. It's knowing this. And really, I would say the slight undercurrent of frustration over that, because you realize it, and the blocks to someone discovering it are overwhelming. I've wondered how we could bring our children into the world without all this happening. But I've never figured that one out.